Yes. Yes. So most people finished, 34. Put up your hands if you finished, just so I know. So if I give another minute just for you to finish. But in the meantime, you'll see there's a box at the end. So you need to count up. Well, at the end of each line. So if you look at question 1, I felt terribly alone and isolated. Put in the box at the end, which says office use only, the number that you put for that question. And do that all the way down. And then on the second page, count up for each letter the score. So count up all the F's, all the P's, all the W's, all the R's. Yes. So on the second page at the bottom where it says, thank you for your time in completing this questionnaire, down here, you need to put your scores in these boxes here.
Sorry, Christine, so you add up F's, for instance.
Yes.
In
the top box.
The top box.
Yes. 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 You can do the mean scores. So when you've got the total scores for each category, you need to divide them. You might need your calculator on your phone for this. You divide them by the number of each category. So for W, which is well-being, there are 4 questions. So the number that you have in the W, well-being box, you divide by 4. Sorry? Yes, or you could help each other as well. You could help a friend. We've got plenty of time. And for P, there's 12. You divide the number by 12. And for F by 12, and R by 6. So the W's you divide by 4. The P's and the F's you divide by 12. And R you divide by 6. When you've done your division, you should have a value between 0 and 4. Are you finding that? You should have a value between 0 and 4. Good. Yes? Yes. Are you done? You don't have a score? Feels like school. It's a bit. Most of us don't do this sort of maths past school. But actually, when you've done it a bit, you get better at it. So, is anybody completely stuck and feeling discouraged and needs some help? Have most of you got some measurements now, some scores between 0 and 4? And if those of you that haven't, are you nearly there, or are you sort of willing to go along with this? Take my word for it. Now, of course, if you've got lots of money, you can buy the software that does this for you. And if you're doing it on a shoestring, you have to do it yourself. But when you've got your scores, you can look at this chart, which is in the core manual, which gives you the cut-offs. And this is based on the way they develop the measure. There's two. This is for women, and there's one for men. It's quite similar, but slightly different. So when you read these, they look a bit fuzzy to me. So here's the scores along the bottom from 0 to 4, which you should have for each of the measures: problems, well-being, functioning, risk. And this black is the clinical population according to CORE. So if your score for well-being is higher than 1.77, the CORE measurement would put you in the clinical population. If it's below that, you're in the non-clinical population, according to CORE. Yes, over. So this figure here is the cutoff, okay? So the higher you score towards 4, the higher you go into the clinical population. Sorry? Yes, I'll read the numbers. So at the top, the cutoff for the total average that you've got is 1.29. 1.29 for women. And for men, it's 1.19. For men, it's 1.19 for the total of all the items. The next one is the total for non-risk. We haven't done that, but there is part of the process is that you take the risk score out and then work out the non-risk total. All right, we haven't, you might have done that, but I didn't tell you to do that. If you have done it, it's for men, it's 1.36. And for women, it's 1.5. The cutoff for risk for women is 0.13. If you've got more than 0.13, then you would, according to CORE, be in the clinical population. For men, That's 0.43. Okay, for men it's 0.43. For women, functioning, F, functioning, the cutoff is 1.3. And for men, it's 1.29. Yes? It's the division between what CORE calls the clinical population and the non-clinical. Okay. I can't hear you, Yelena.
Important for me as a psychologist, it's important to say that these norms are for the UK. So in each country, you need to have norms for each country, it's not just the numbers. So we could say cutoff for UK sample, for UK people, not for, when you are instruments, psychological instruments,
Thank you.
you need to be aware of the norms. This is the norms for the UK, not for Serbian sample, not for Italian, not for
Yes. Did everyone hear? That was a really important point Yelena was making, that the research has been done on, for what the norms are, have been done on populations in the UK. So when the measures translated, those norms are not redone. That would be another piece of work. At the moment, when you're using it in Serbian, you're using the UK norms, aren't you? Yeah.
Can we continue?
Yes. Where did I get to? P. Problems. The cutoff for men for P is 1.44. And for women, it's 1.02. And for well-being, for women, it's 1.77. And for men, it's 1.35. Okay. Yes?
Could you add something about the cutoff score?
About the?
Cutoff score.
Yes.
I think it is important to mention that cutoff score is very rough statistical measure, some kind of estimation that the majority of the clinical population would be above cutoff score, but still there are the part of non-clinical population that would also have higher score, and otherwise, vice versa. So it's statistical measure that cutoff score that would account for the majority, but that is not like diagnosis.
Yes. Thank you. That's a really good point to make, and it's to do with the core measurement, and it's how they've done it. So it's not saying that people are. It's not diagnostic in that way. Yeah. It is what it is. It isn't more than that. That's really helpful to bear in mind. It's good that some of you are obviously really statistically minded, and for those of us that are not, these things are really important to bear in mind. So if I go back to these dreaded graphs, to a blank one, here, for example, well, it's post-score cutoff. No, it's got one that's both on them. Okay, this is the pre-score clinical cutoff. So you could say you've all been doing a pre-therapy score, okay? And so you'd plot on here, if you were going to do the graph, to see visually, you would plot on here where your score is. So if you look at your total now, the total score, average, it would be, to be in the non-clinical population, you would be this side of these lines, I'm not going to ask you if you are. But, and some clients are. But quite a lot of clients come this side to one extent or another. And in order to show by the time they come to the end of therapy, which is the measurement up this axis, what we're interested in is where they end up. Do they end up improved, deteriorated? Have they changed? And is the change enough for it to be reliable? And is it a clinical change, or have they just, were they okay before and they're okay afterwards? So that's kind of what it shows. That's kind of how you do it. Obviously, if you're doing the study, you don't all have to work the sums out all the time, but you do have to collect the data. But it's quite useful to get a feel of what you do with the data. So, any comments or questions about the experience, or thoughts about it, or how you found doing it? Do you want to use the microphone, because it's hard to hear?
I don't think I need it. I didn't do the score myself. I was trying to imagine one of my clients who's been really bad. But if she would have been in this, so she scored 2.79. She's in the clinical band. Would you say that the cutoff, the black line is sort of the normal score, or the normal?
Do you say 2.79? So her score would be up here, wouldn't it? And then depending on where she was at the end, so you'd plot her here to start with. 2.79 would be here on this axis. And then depending on where she ended up at the end of therapy, you need the other axis, don't you?
Can I make a comment?
If she would, yes.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I think the confusing bit about this graph is that the lines have nothing to do. Usually we think sort of, the further up,
Yes.
the better it is. But I think the best improvement is at the right bottom end here, because
Down
you
here.
have a high score at the beginning and a low score at the end. So
Yes.
the plot is at the right bottom corner.
Yes.
That would be the best improvement.
Yes.
The worst outcome would be sort of starting off with 0 and having a 4 again.
Yes.
That will be the left top.
So you'd end up here.
Yeah.
Up here. Yes.
So the lines tell you something sort of, where people should be, but it's at the right bottom end that
Down
they
here.
should end up with the most improvement. And I
Yes.
think that's the confusing about those lines, because you think the higher up on the right hand side, the better it is, but it's not.
That's helpful to point that out. So this is where you'd want to be, in here, or you want your clients to be here. Yeah.
I think the confusion is that we did this once, and for look at the data, we need to put it twice. And
Yes.
again, this is the plot, actually.
That the plot is the two together. Yes. Yes. Yes, and that's the point, is that you can see if you don't have both sets, you don't have the measurement at the beginning and at the end, you can't plot the dot. That's the problem. So that's why it's really important when you're doing the study that you find a way of getting both sets of data. Yeah.
Because this is the first assessment.
That's right. So what you've done, So what you've done is what a client would do before going into therapy. And then to get the dot, to be able to plot it, you need to know where they are at the end. and then you'd put them where they were. And that's, so this is showing reliable change. In the clinical population, yes. Because this is change in the non-clinical population down here.
I have another question. What Ivana was lifting about the norms of these cutoffs.
Yes.
This is the UK norms, but how do you work out when you find, I mean, we will be connected to Linköping, the university. He will probably have some kind of population norms in Sweden, but how do you do it? Is it connected to Chris Evans, or how do you find those data?
The thing is, if you do change the normative population, then I'm not sure that that there'll be comparable data sets. That's the problem. This is really good it's really good to discuss this and to tease these issues out, because if you want to use the measurement across Europe, you have to use the same. That's why it's being translated and why the norms are not being redone. Now, this sort of research, it's like a lot of work to come out with a little nugget, which is why I told you what our results was at the beginning. So if the European country, if you in Sweden did this with the UK norms and, in Serbia and so on, what we've got is comparable data sets. Now, the next step might be to do one with Swedish norms and compare it. But you've got to do it bit by bit, systematically, in order to build up the research base.
So that is what you were talking to me about yesterday, how we could be able to compare results from country to country with individual norms from the countries, but ultimately like the next step.
But that would be another step, wouldn't it? We'd have to use the same measure initially, otherwise it would be a lot of work, but we wouldn't be able to compare. Tomasz.
I have one doubt about this course, because I got a client now, her situation is really fucked up, but when she talks about herself, she's, great, wonderful. So I think that what therapy also improves is capacity for self-reflection. So in the end, she may be more able to realistically assess herself, and it would be like worse, but in fact, she has more realistic picture. So.
Yes. So what do people think about that? That the fact that clients might feel worse rather than better?
I don't know if I'm going to answer that question, but I'm kind of in a similar place with this gentleman. Yeah. I was wondering about different personality styles, and their responses to these questions might be quite different according to where they are situated in their personality style.
I don't like microphones.
Did everybody hear me?
No.
He doesn't like you either.
Oh. Okay. So my question was, I'm curious about the impact of different personality styles on their self-assessment. I can imagine different personality styles responding very differently to the same question here. And is that addressed by the number of the sample, for example? How do we work that out? Is that clear as a question?
Yes. I mean, I think it's an interesting question. Whether people try and skew the answers or whatever. Really,
it's not. I'm not talking about skewing. I'm talking about a personality style responding to something in a different way. You might have somebody who's very, I don't know, sort of slightly histrionic, who might respond in a different way to somebody who's much more introverted to the same question. So I wonder how that is addressed, because I don't think we do that kind of categorization before we apply this tool, do we?
No, you don't. And it's only addressed by the sample population. So yes, so it's a very, so in that way, I mean, what you're spotting is kind of possible areas of inaccuracy. And you're right to spot that.
Okay, so we need to address sample size and who is our population when we are using this tool.
Well, it's a worked out measurement, you know, so you could critique how the measurement has been put together, like you could any psychological measurement. But I suppose if the idea would be to collect enough data sets for that to become, you know, not a significant artifact.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That would also be the case for people who have drug problems, right?
Yes.
So it's just a big sample size, and you would include these people or not?
Yes. And in the therapy assessment form, which we haven't looked at, I think that would come up. You would put down the problem, the space put down their problems on the ICD-10 code, and that would be recorded there.
No, I mean, overall, I think this is wonderful, and I think it's a great tool for assessing big sample sizes. It's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think this is a very powerful tool to show that Gestalt therapy is effective. I'm a bit confused then if you go into the individual dots. The meaning of it is of course depending on anything, on the style, on the personality. So to me it shows, this shows nicely that Gestalt therapy is effective because there is on the ensemble, there is an improvement to be measured. But I was wondering if you compare this with other kind of therapies, have you done this to see how this effect on Gestalt therapy is different, say, from another kind of therapy?
Well, in the article, we compared our quite small study with 3 or 4 other studies that have been published of roughly similar client populations, so primary care. And they were other modalities. They certainly weren't Gestalt. They were largely person-centered. And the results were quite comparable. That was the main finding, really, that with the other modalities that were being researched, our figures differed by mostly insignificant amounts. I mean, yesterday people were talking about the dodo effect, you know, the fact that you do this research and it comes out that Gestalt is broadly in line with the research on other modalities. And, you know, that is a finding, that's an important finding. And I think Peter Schultes' research was very interesting in perhaps unpacking that, you know, why that might be. But I suppose what I'm wanting to sort of share with you really is it's not, it's not terribly exciting what you find out, but you do find out what you find out, and it's important to start from that base. Really, it's important to have done it. It's important.
I agree. I think it is important in matter of recognition.
Yeah.
How you can divide reliable and clinical improvement? How can distinguish?
Reliable and clinical. Well, the clinical improvement has to be to the right. It has to be here. It has to be here. And to be reliable, it has to be in this bit. So this is reliable and clinical. This bit here. Does that make sense to you?
How do you measure that the client has clinically improved?
How do you measure the client has clinically improved? Because they have to have a higher. No, is it higher?
Christine, but not from the graph. Just come to.
Oh, not from the graph. It's with the score. So.
By the core score or some other, like diagnosis?
That's I mean the same. Eh? That is my question was the same.
If you this one, if you're using, this is only if you're the core measurement. It just shows what it shows. So it's not diagnostic. It's only measuring on these 4 categories, 4 elements. So, in your clinical work, you would be, if you do Gestalt diagnosis, if you'd be using all that. It doesn't count that. It doesn't affect that. Is that your question? I don't know if I'm answering the question. Does that answer your question? Can you ask it again then?
Maybe I can answer the question.
Please.
Yeah, it's these are really 2 different concepts. One is statistically reliable change,
yes.
which means that the measurement, the instrument does not measure precisely the change. So if the change is small, it's not statistically reliable because it can be caused by measurement error. So statistically reliable change means that it must be of enough size. Maybe I can show you on the graph because it's already there.
Yeah, thank you.
This line means that the client has the same score pre-therapy and post-therapy. Yeah. And this dashed line means that the size of the change is not big enough for us to be sure that the change has really occurred. Yeah? So this is statistically reliable change. The clinically meaningful change means that the client crosses the cutoff score. So he or she moves from the clinical population to the non-clinical population. And this is expressed by this line. Yeah? So it's
And here another 2 questions, please. You mentioned that the core system is validated by the NHS of the United Kingdom. I wonder whether these would be recognized in other countries, meaning if I'm using core in Spain, let's say, will it be admitted by my government? I mean, I understand that this is one of the reasons why we are standardizing and trying to prove mathematically. That's my first question. And my second is it's a very good exercise to translate into other languages. I wonder whether the cutoff figures are also being calculated in order to have a reliable comparisons. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions. The first one, the power of, I wouldn't say that it's, I mean, there are a lot of NHS services that are using it, amongst other measures. It's not the measure that the NHS has embraced. I wouldn't say like that. But it's because it's got such a big database now that it's seen as respectable and widely used. That's what's powerful about it. And a lot of NHS services use it alongside other ones. So it's because of its large database that it would be useful, perhaps in Spain. And the other question about the cut-off points, whether they'd need to be changed, we were discussing that before. If it might be to be a useful measure, a more useful measure in your country, that the work would need to be redone with local populations. But if you do that, it means that we couldn't together on a pan-European collaboration we wouldn't really have comparable data. We'd be using different measures. So I think, obviously it's a good idea, but maybe as another project, or instead of, it depends what people would be interested to do. Where's the microphone? Where's Jan? Where's Jan? Oh.
That even if you're in England, a patient within the NHS, you might be of a different ethnic background. You might not be English, you might be Spanish, you might be Iraqi, you might be anything. And all these clients still use the same core measurement. So in that sense, yes, you can be sort of nitpicking and saying, well, there's a difference, but everybody's working from the same hymn sheet. So I don't think it makes much sense to, at least in Europe, to think about sort of a large differentiation.
Jojo.
I'm really in the need of a break. I don't know if you have some plan. And I wanted to ask you, I'm really interested in the questions about how to deal with therapists, getting therapists to stay, the dropout rates, and the challenges and results that you've had in the working, because we're also seeing CORE as something that you can use as a tool in the therapy, because you will get instant feedback, if you want, from each session, and how you have been working with that and the results of that.
Yes. Well, several questions. Just to respond to that last point first. It's true that there are modalities that are using CORE in the therapy, and there is a shortened version of CORE, CORE10, where in fact people use it every session. Now, I have ethical and methodological concerns about that, because I think that it skews the therapy. We're talking about Gestalt relational therapy. If you want your client to, fill in 10 questions each time to see whether the therapy is helping or not, then that becomes what the therapy is about if you're not careful. So I think we have to be very careful about how we use this measure. I don't personally see it as a therapy tool. I think it changes the therapy. It skews the relationship. It becomes more manualized. And I think, there are modalities, you can imagine, using it like that. I think we have to be very, discriminating how we use it. I think to use it as an outcome measure is one thing. To use it as a therapeutic tool is quite another thing, and needs carefully considering from a Gestalt perspective. I was aware that people have been putting up with quite a lot, getting your head doing sums and you can tell that I'm not a natural mathematician, so I'm really grateful for the statisticians in the audience who have been able to explain things a bit more clearly than I have. And the thing is that you don't actually have to be a maths whiz to do this kind of research. And there's always people around who can help, is what I want to say. You know, it's not my strong point. You can see that I struggle with these concepts, but I suppose my, making it happen, I feel, is really important. And, we all have different strengths and abilities, and something about the collaborative nature of this is I suppose, what I take from it, really. I think, it would be good to have, Jan, I was thinking it would be good to have a break, and then what I would like would be for us to come back and to maybe talk in smaller groups for a bit, so it's easier to communicate. And I would really like us to think about whether this idea of, whether CORE is useful, and the other questions you've got, if you could someone could record these questions in your group, and then the idea of whether, might it be possible to have a European-wide project? If people if people are interested, if they think CORE is a useful measure, if you want to set up a national project, all the practical questions about that, what would it involve, write those down, we can talk about those. And then would there be interest? Do people think it's a worthwhile expenditure of effort, A, to do it nationally, and B, to do it internationally in Europe? Because it could be really exciting, you can imagine. So, Jan, how long shall we break for? Yanni, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. I was just say something about the translation and validation about your question. Because in Italy we are using the CORE OM as a tool for research in our national organization. And Roberta and Silvia are the people that are taking care of this research in our country. And I was looking in the website of the CORE OM, where there is the list of countries where it is translated and validated, and is not updated because there is not Italy. But in Italy, a colleague from the cognitive modality has translated it and then has validated it. And so we can use it with our parameters, of course. And for instance, it is translated in Spanish, but it's Argentinian Spanish. So probably the language is available in Spanish, but maybe there is not the validation in Spain. So the colleague that validated it in Italy had a very good collaboration with a group in the UK that created the CORE OM. They are very, very available to support people in each country to validate the method. So if anybody is interested in validating in her or his country, there is a very good support from the UK group. This is the experience. Yes, this is Chris Evans. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, shall we, is it a good idea? Shall we do this? Come back and have a break and come back and have this discussion and then maybe bring the questions together? So, shall we come back at 10 past? Yeah?